So in our previous lesson, we thought about our audience, and we really tried to understand how they see the world and how they think. In this lesson, we're going to generate an insight. And what an insight is a sort of guiding principle that drives the work, connects it, holds it all together. This is what separates good work, okay work, things that are just, yeah, it's fine, from great work. So let's dive into that and get started with that. So here, we're generating an insight. Understanding the brief we have in front of us, we step back and try to connect this problem to an insight. This will elevate our work beyond being just aesthetic manipulation and execution and or whatever clever turn of phrase we can figure out. So the first question is, what is an insight? An insight is an observation about how the world works that feels both surprising and true. When we say the insight as like a line, we want it to be something that sort of gives you like an aha feeling, but it also should feel like something that you can nod your head to and be like, yeah, I get that. I think a good rule of thumb when you think of an insight is if you think of like stand-up comedians. A lot of stand-up comedians, guys like Jerry Seinfeld or like Kevin Hart, you'll notice they start a lot of their jokes with like, you ever notice, isn't it funny how I think that people, or back in the days, a little bit more problematic, they go like, women do this, black people do this, white people do this. These are all insights. They're takes on the world. Our insight really needs to be a take that frames the world in a very specific way. It doesn't need to be funny at all. It can be any emotion, but people do need to agree with them sort of outright. When you say your insight, it should be something that people can, for the most part, agree with. Especially your clients need to agree with your insights. And if they don't immediately, that's okay, but you have to prove it out and make it so that they can understand how you've come to this conclusion. And by the end of your proving it out, they agree with your insight. Now, an insight can be about the world in general. Those are very philosophical. The key to happiness is a loving family. That's just about the world. That is very broad. It's just purely philosophical. It can be about the audience. Again, remember we target a very specific group of people and we can say something about that group of people that they all can shake their head to and say, yes, we are like that. An insight can also be about the world of the product. So if you are selling a car that drives really fast, you can make your insight about the experience of driving very fast. You can make the insight about the experience of racing. That's very specific to that product. Again, as long as it is something that is surprising and true about the world of the product, it'll still count as an insight. Lastly, your insight can be about the product itself. You can pull one specific detail about the product and really sort of emphasize that. If you have the lightest shoe that is on the market, that is something you can pull out. If you have the fastest car, it doesn't have to always be the superlative sort of thing. Any specific thing that you can pull out of the experience of the product, you can make that an insight, as long as it feels surprising and true. Here, we'll take a pause and we'll look at a great example of this, which is a commercial from Apple Music that's called Beats One. So we'll dive into it and we'll dissect it afterwards.
This is St. Laurent Beats One. We got the whole world locked in for this one. Brand new Pharrell.
Hold up. Let me go. You carry what they see. You carry what they know. Your first name is free. Last name is Denver. Man's red flower. It's in every little thing. Mind use your power. Spirit use your wings. When the baby first breathes. When night sees sunrise. When the wheel hunts the sea. When man recognizes. Freedom. Freedom.
So you just watched a spot for Apple Music's Beats One. Now, what Beats One was it was a radio station within Apple Music streaming service. It had just launched and it was a very big deal at the time. And the reason I just showed you this is because I think it's a great example of how a very clear and very simple insight led to producing a piece of work. So obviously the insight here is that music is sort of universal and that no matter where you are in the world, no matter what socioeconomic status you have, anything like that, music hits all of us in the same way. It makes us cry, it makes us dance, laugh, all of the things. And so that insight, as we talked about, insight should be surprising and true. That insight is very true. I don't think anyone would argue with you that, music hits everyone and gives you very strong emotional responses. So it's very true. It's not very surprising though. It's the sort of thing you would say and everyone would be like, yeah, okay, cool, great. I think the surprising thing is in the execution. And so what they really did here was that they pulled people from every far-flung corner of the world and showed them listening to music and saw them dancing and laughing and crying and all of that. And I think the thing is that by basing it all on one American pop song, it's a Pharrell song, but having that one Pharrell song and watching all these different people react to this Pharrell song, this is where you get the bit of surprising things. You see someone in like Southeast Asia on a tiny boat, in the middle of nowhere, and they're listening to a Pharrell song and they're bopping along just like you would in Chicago driving to the mall. And that's where their little bit of surprising comes in. But very clear how this insight that music is the universal language, it affects everyone and totally powers us and gives us these very high emotional responses, drives this piece of work. So now let's apply this same insight work to our two examples. So now we'll dive into our two examples. What I'm going to do here is for each one, I'm going to generate an insight that varies from being about the world in general, about the audience, product, into the world of the product, just so you can see how we can approach one thing and just think about insights for it in totally different ways. So the first one, let's have an insight about how the world works in general. So for the rapper, we have the insight that with time comes wisdom. We understand better how the world works as we age. Let's remember, we said that this rapper was a little bit older for the rap game. So that is totally an insight that is applicable to the world at large, but also will be very applicable to him in specific in relation to his peers. So now we have an insight about the audience. People listen to gangster rap for vicarious thrills. The characters the rappers portray do all the things the audience wants to, but shouldn't. This is just based purely off of the audience and understanding how they think and how they approach the thing that they binds together, which is gangster rap music. Here we have an insight about the world of the product. To be an older criminal, our rapper's character would have had to have seen a lot, done a lot, learned a lot. He'd have to have a lot of stories to tell. Again, because our product here is an album, ultimately going to be music and the stories told within the music, the sound of the music. Those are the details in this specific instance. And so here we're looking at the character that this rapper portrays. And again, just by virtue of him being an older criminal as a character, he would have to have a lot of stories. He'd have to have a lot of knowledge. He'd have a lot of stories to tell. Totally the type of person you would want to sit down and have a beer with, because he's definitely going to be able to tell you a lot of wild stuff. That's something that we can work with. And now we go with an insight about the product very specifically. Our rapper has sampled old soul records with his new record. Old soul records are often love songs. They feel sweet and musically rich. Now we're diving deep into strictly the details of our product and pulling out one specific thing, the sound of it. Sonically, it is drawn from those soul samples, and those things, that music feels very rich, it's very emotional, and that's something, again, that we can work with that will be surprising and true as we take it as a jumping off point for our work. So now let's jump into the running shoe. And here we follow, again, the same process. If we have an insight about how the world works in general, life is like an endurance race. It's about perseverance, pacing, and focus. This feels very true. Anyone who's lived a life, who's not a child, understands that it's a bit of endurance. You keep going. You have days when you're moving fast and you feel great. You have days when you're slow and it's not so great. You have to pace yourself. You have to focus. To do anything requires all of these skills. So in a way, life is like an endurance race. Again, that is not something that you would have immediately thought of when you just placed to sit and think about a race, but this is the sort of insight we can come up with when we think about this brief in this very specific way. Now, when we think about the audience, new runners are always running towards something. They're goal-oriented, improvement-oriented. Again, we look at that audience research we did before, and now we understand the mind of a runner. Lots of people run because they want to feel a little bit more healthy. They want to lose a couple of pounds. They realize, hey, I have a sedentary life. Or some people run because they say, I want to run a marathon. That's just like a thing. I want to be able to say I did that thing. All three of those things are all very goal-oriented. They're always striving towards a specific thing, or maybe all three of those things. But running isn't something you just do without any sort of purpose. Even if your goal is to simply just beat your own personal best, it's not the best time ever. You just want to move your personal best just a little bit forward each time. You're very goal-oriented and ultimately improvement-oriented. Now, we look at an insight about the world of the product. Runners often find it hard to make time in life to run. So now we're just talking about running in general. And when we go back to our audience research and we look at runners, they're often trying to find the time to carve out in their day to get their run in. Some people run early in the morning. Some people run late at night. Some people take an hour out of the day and instead of eating lunch, they go run, come back, take a shower, and then eat lunch while they're in meetings or whatever. It's always going to be a struggle to find time to run, especially for people who are doing endurance running where it's not going to be a 20-minute run. It's going to be an hour. It's going to be 2 hours to be able to cover the amount of distance that they need to. That, again, is something that we can work with and build upon as we start to make work. So now we get into an insight about the product. We could hone in on the shoe's comfort. They're so comfortable, you stop thinking about your feet. You stop thinking, period. Running is a form of meditation. The comfort was the one detail that had about the shoe that was sort of a positive. And so we can take that positive and we can amplify it, we can exaggerate it. If you're running and you're not thinking about your feet, you're just moving and you're just focused on that. That, in a way, is a form of meditation. We can use that insight and jump off from there. But by taking that thing and really thinking about this insight we have about the product, that it's so comfortable you won't even notice the shoes, we can now turn it into something that is a bit more hyperbolic and more exciting and a little bit more visceral for the audience. So now we're going to look at a piece of work that I had done for Mishka. It's called Salon Surreal. So here we're going to look and see how an insight, again, drives a piece of work and really helps shape it and create it. So the insight on this one was very simple. A lot of times, women steal clothing from their boyfriends and repurpose it into things that they'll wear. Whether that be the giant hoodie that girls like to wear that they've stolen from their boyfriends, or it's taking an old t-shirt and cutting it up and making it into a crop top or something like that. This is a fairly common phenomenon. But this phenomena was what drove the creation of this entire spot. This was a specific case where, working for the brand, I was able to create a piece of work driven from the insight entirely. There was no existing brief. The brief was made because of the insight. I realized my girlfriend at the time had been stealing my clothes and said, hey, we're selling a lot of our market share to guys, but we have totally neglected women in any of our advertising. And so the thought here was, what if we were able to pitch our clothing to women? The clothing wasn't shaped towards women, but just showing women a way that they could wear our clothing and really making it appealing to them, make it something that they would really want to do and could see themselves in. As you watch the spot, you'll notice that it is a bit hazy, it's a bit chaotic, it's a bit surreal. And that's because the nature of the brand, it was drawing a lot of inspiration from things like science fiction, horror movies, comic books, obscure pieces of media. That was their bread and butter. That was their reason for being. And so we wanted to make sure that even though we were talking to a new customer, that we wanted to make sure that we still represented the brand in the way that was true to who they were. I'd also like to point out one thing, is that as we're talking about insights and we're saying insights have to be surprising and true, and I say that the insight for this specific piece of work was driven from the idea that my girlfriend was stealing my clothes. You may say that insight is true, we all know about this thing that happens, but it's not very surprising. There have been memes made about it. There are, people on the internet are always making jokes about it. I would point you to look at memes and the internet and things that people joke about as a great source for insights. Because if people are making a consistent joke about it, it's something that can be continually added on to and reiterated. That means it is likely very true. And so when you present that in a slightly different form, you can now get this sort of surprising element of it to come through. So now let's take a look. So now we have an insight. And to be honest, this will be the part of the process that will take you the longest when you start this and will be the most misunderstood. But once we have a really strong insight, we will make great work. We will make work that feels very resonant. In the next lesson, we're going to get into an idea, and that idea will be built directly off of the insight that we have just established.